Okay, welcome back to another Just 5 Mins. Not more AI, please. You know, it's too much, isn't it? It's overwhelmed, and I don't know what the next one is. You know, like it's something like if you've ever watched Spaceballs, you know, the really old Mel Brooks sci-fi rip-off of Star Wars. You know, they go. I think they've got like sublight light speed, and I think they end up at something called ludicrous speed, which is probably what we're at the moment. But anyway, with all that said, I'm still going to go into a bit of what's happening in the AI stuff. Well, for certainly for coding, and an interesting thing, really. I think there's a lot of stuff, and I was literally doing this as well, is, you know, can you build an application from scratch without knowing anything about coding? And the short answer is yes, but you have to know what you want very specifically, and it depends on the complexity of what you're trying to build. So just to put it into context, really, I've done a little bit of mobile development in the past, and I've tried quite a few cross-platform mobile frameworks over the years. I haven't tried Flutter, actually, which is quite an interesting one. But I did get along with Xamarin quite well back in the day, because it was .NET, C#, all that sort of stuff. But Xamarin, well, Microsoft bought Xamarin, and it morphed into something called .NET MAUI. I think it was multi-application user interface, or I don't know, one of those things anyway. But it's .NET MAUI, MAUI. Okay, so I did actually say, look, I just wanted to build a relatively easy application. Okay, it's cross-platform, but it is cross-platform anyway when you create it in Visual Studio, for example. There are lots of these available, by the way. Like I've mentioned, there's Flutter. There's so many cross-platform development environments. But like I say, if you're a .NET developer, you know, MAUI is a good one to look at. Anyway, the point being is I said, okay, I want to just build a quotation app. So it's going to have an image on the top 2/3 of the screen and a nice quote, and maybe every so often, like every so many seconds, it's going to rotate and have some nice transitions and things like that. And eventually, the idea is I'll build an API backend, something that I'm going to do in Azure functions, serverless functions, because that just lends itself to that. It's all very cheap, free type stuff. Anyway, I did get it to build, but I wanted to build it with like the sort of best practice, and one of, because there are many, obviously, lots of flavors of ice cream out there. But one is MVVM. So if you've heard of MVC, Model View Controller, that's used a lot in a lot of web API type patterns. MVVM has been around for a long time as well. Model View Model, which sounds a bit backwards, forwards, but anyway, it's a good pattern. You have a view model to where all your logic and data is, a view, which is where your user interface definition is, if you want to call it that. So it's quite a good thing. So I asked it. There's a really good library for .NET MAUI called the Community Toolkit. Okay, and it's actually really good. I'll get the link in the show notes for that. But basically, I did get it to... It took a bit of work, actually, to be honest. And I was using GitHub Copilot. Okay, I was using... And I've tried a couple of the... Because you can use GPT-4o, you can use Claude, Anthropic's Claude, which I'll come back to in a second. You can use Claude 3.7, which is Sonnet 3.7, the latest one as the time of this recording, anyway. And... to be honest, I think Claude actually did slightly a better job. But here's the thing. It's and by the way, I'm going to go over 5 minutes, just if you're thinking, why is it called just 5 minutes? You're right. I don't know why. But anyway, the idea is that, I think this is augmented development. I think that's, and I know that's not a new phrase. I'm not trying to, be a trailblazer here, but it really does feel like that. It's sort of, can you build this from scratch without really knowing about it? Yeah, maybe you could get lucky, but it's like herding cats. You have to really herd the AI in the right direction, and you have to be really quite specific. Like when I was adding the MVVM aspect, it sort of did half of it and left some of the existing stuff that wasn't moved into view model views. Okay, so I then tried to do it myself, which I probably should have known, in fairness, but I didn't. Anyway, I finally got there, and I did actually get to a point where, without actually, because I was actually going to use something like some sync views and components to do the nice image transitions, but I thought, well, hang on a minute, it's really quite straightforward. I don't really want to use any other libraries, even though I'm using the .NET MAUI Community Toolkit. Anyway, it did end up creating it, and it did end up doing a really decent job. But my goodness, you have to have patience more than anything. And I think my good friend Tim did a post on LinkedIn about that. It's like, when do you give up? And in my case, I think I'm so naive. Never is the answer, because I'm just like a terrier with once it's got hold of your leg, if you get that reference. But I don't know. It's just something and maybe to my detriment really is I just keep going and going, and I don't know any better, to be honest. I don't know when to stop. And I've got the luxury that this isn't I'm not building this as a business or in a company or working for someone. If I was, I'd be fired anyway, I'm sure. But you know what I mean? I've got that flexibility to not know when to quit. And I've quite embraced that, actually. But you do have to have patience, tenacity, and I'm not saying that I've got patience, but I don't know about any specific skills. But you do have to sort of bear with it. But it did end up creating me a cross-platform mobile application that I can install on a Mac, Windows, Android, iOS. I haven't got that far yet, but I've done that sort of stuff in the past, and it has got easier to deploy to these stores. But anyway, the idea is what I want to do, I haven't built the back end. I've got a mock API that's returning some sort of like test images and test quotes. But it works. But it did take a lot of patience. But what I would say is that I got access to, it's only just come out again of what are we in? End of Feb, start of March 2025. Claude Code. Okay. Now, Claude Code is a little bit more of GitHub Copilot is a dev tool in a lot of ways, I guess. But Claude Code is a command line interface, okay, from the prompt. Like a command prompt and things like that. Now, the one thing I had a little bit of a tricky thing setting up is I'm on a Windows platform. At the moment anyway, it really only works on a Mac or Linux, which is Linux anyway, isn't it? Mac platform. Okay. Apparently you can install it on WSL. So if you've got Windows 11 and the Windows subsystem for Linux on your setup, you can install it on that. I did try, but I kept getting errors, and there were some workarounds, but that's where, funny enough, my limit of Linux knowledge isn't that great. But all I did was go to my trusty Docker desktop and got an official canonical download of Ubuntu as a container, ran that, and of course then I had no problems at all. I could load the Claude Code CLI. By the way, you do have to have an Anthropic, because it's Anthropic who own, obviously, Claude and Claude Code. You do have to have a login, and you do have to have at least some credit. Now, you can start with $5, but here's the thing. A lot of the other like even GitHub Copilot, there's a really generous free version. And apparently now, I've just been looking at this, but I haven't really gone into it much more, is Gemini Code Assist. So that's the Google one that luckily they've made it available as a plugin to Visual Studio Code, to JetBrains Rider, and a few other bits as well. But I haven't tried that one yet. But back to Claude Code. Once I got it set up and running, I thought, okay, I've been playing around with an application to draw create my own diagram, but without any libraries. Okay, so I said, look, I want this web application, HTML, JavaScript, CSS only, and I want to create this sort of like a diagram canvas with a little palette to one side with some symbols in, typical workflow symbols, decision steps, process, whatever the typical workflow symbols that you find. And I gave it a relatively good prompt, I thought, anyway. And I gave that a go. It basically is an agentic development environment, okay? So a little bit like, and there is, by the way, agents coming in Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio with GitHub Copilot. In the Visual Studio Code Insiders version, it's got agent mode that will actually go through and check itself and do things like that. And that's what sort of Claude Code is doing as well. So I had a blank directory, I kid you not. I asked it, like I say, I was quite descriptive of what I wanted it to do. But ultimately, there was a blank directory. Press the button. It said, okay, I'm going to create these files. Do you want me to do them? And I said, yes, carry on. And it buzzed away for maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, 5 at the absolute, quicker than this podcast that's meant to be just 5 minutes. But anyway, and it created it. And the absolute first run, I thought, okay, it's bound to be a bit dodgy and it probably won't run. All I did is, this was in Visual Studio Code, by the way, connected to the dev container in Docker. If you don't know about those things, I'll quite happy to explain them at some stage what I use. I'm not an expert in them, but I know how to at least get them running. Anyway, but the point being is I just opened up a preview to look at the index.html that it created. And it loaded up and it let me drag and drop these little workflow components, drag connectors between the two. Now, it's all a bit raw looking. It doesn't look polished by any means, but did it work? Crikey, it did. It definitely deserves a crikey because that was just with one prompt, blank directory, and it built it. And it built it in really decent sort of vanilla JavaScript. So it didn't use Angular, Vue, React, or anything like that. I specifically wanted it just native sort of JavaScript, CSS, and obviously HTML there. And for one shot prompt that I didn't really do anything else. Now I can obviously start refining it, saying, okay, I want this to be a little bit color scheme like this. I want to do that. I want to do this. But for one prompt for it to go and do that, I thought that was quite incredible. So Claude Code, you do need, like I say, you do need a little bit of setup there, but it's not impossible. If I can do it, anybody really can do it. But that's what I've got. It's really just, I think it's like, how far can you go with these things? Well, it depends how much patience you've got, like I've mentioned. When should you stop? I don't know. That's the honest answer for me. I'm not working in as a commercial developer anymore. I think if I was, obviously there'd be more constraints there, certainly. But the fact is, it's really augmenting what you can do as a developer. And you don't need to know a huge amount to get started. But I think if you're just building a really basic application, like a basic web app, I think you could do that quite comfortably without really any major knowledge. But if you want to go a little bit further, yeah, you do need to know at least a bit about the platform, the environment that you're working in, of course. And some would say, yeah, otherwise you're just going to have this rogue code that nobody knows what it's really doing. So you do have to sort of understand it. But can it help you from a productivity perspective? Well, obviously that's a plain absolutely. Like I said, if you've got a certain snippet of code, it's going to be able to really help you. But if you want to build a whole application, well, you might have to be a little bit patient with it. But yeah, like I say, Gemini Code Assist I'm going to be looking at as well. But it's just overwhelm, isn't it, with all of these things? And I think that it's like flavors of ice cream. Just use what works for you. If you don't like that because you don't like that company, well, try something else. I certainly think, GitHub Copilot has been really good for a general amount of stuff. But when I looked at Claude Code, for example, the way that it built that application in sort of agent mode, as it were, was phenomenal, blew me away. But like I say, agents are coming into Copilot very, very soon anyway. So we'll see how that gets sort of better to actually work out what is missing and what needs correcting and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, this has gone way over 5 minutes. My goodness, it's almost a weekend ramble, this. This should be actually just 15 minutes, and maybe I do a video that's just 5 minutes. I might actually swap that around. But anyway, that's what I've got. So take care, have a good day or good week, and I will certainly catch you on the next one.